Good evening. I'm your host, Jon Kelly, and we'll be together for the next couple of hours exploring the primacy of the American sniper here on Revolution Radio. You may have heard some of my work over the past 20-odd years as a journalist, as a speech analyst with yourinnervoice.com. I'm a journalist with newsinsideout.com. And one of the stories that has captured the world's attention taking place in America relates to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge and the Oregon Standoff, in which one person was shot dead and multiple parties have been arrested and are facing charges in court, which raises all sorts of issues, multiple stakeholders dealing with issues related to land usage, for Native American rights, ranchers' rights, and the Constitution. Many topical issues have been raised. Controversial issues have been raised by this provocative action in which armed militants occupied a national wildlife refuge in near Burns, Oregon, for 41 days. A widely publicized story. If you haven't heard of this story, you may have been out of the country, but it certainly captured the public imagination, and it became a topic of great interest for myself, someone who had been aware of militia-related issues in the United States since the time of the siege at Waco and other incidents of the 1990s, Randy Weaver, and so on. I thought this was a very interesting turn of the corner in American society when Ammon Bundy and his crew took it upon themselves to begin an occupation that lasted 41 days and resulted in the death of a rancher, LaVoy Finicum. And so I brought to bear my investigative tools to these issues and produced a series of articles to discuss my findings in the unconscious communications of the newsmakers surrounding this case. And so I'm going to be bringing some of that audio tonight, and just a note to my engineers that I'm getting a feed. I'm getting some bleed through in my feeds. So if you can help me with that, that's terrific. And I'm going to bring some audio to you tonight, some exclusive audio you may have never heard before. In fact, I'm going to present a methodology that you may never heard of that, in fact, has been very successful in my applications for nearly 20 years as a professional analyst, as a clinician. My personal website is yourinnervoice.com, where people access my professional services. My toll-free number is 1-888-453-0751. If after listening to tonight's presentation you were curious to find out more about secret messages encrypted backwards in the human voice, you can contact me there. But tonight's focus is my stories written for newsinsideout.com. That's a rising star in alternative news that delivered millions of page views in 2015 and is in its second year of publication. We have a lot of very topical and interesting content that my co-editor Alfred Lambremont-Weber and I are producing on a regular basis. So I hope you will take a look at newsinsideout.com. I know visitors to the chat room can find some of our material posted there, and an opportunity for you to reflect on what is being stated. And so, without any further ado, let's take a look at some of the audio that we're going to be listening to tonight. This is from the press conference of January 28, 2016. The FBI Special Agent in Charge Gregory Bretzing is speaking here.
Because there is an ongoing investigation by the Deschutes County Major Crimes Team on part of the Oregon State Police involving this process, I cannot comment on the details or on the specifics. I would, however, ask for your patience as this shooting investigation goes through this normal outside process. At the appropriate time, the medical examiner's office will release the identity of the decedent.
This is with regards to the shooting of LaVoy Finicum at the police roadblock that was established on the highway while two vehicles were en route to a meeting with Sheriff Palmer in a separate county from the wildlife refuge. Well, when I studied this piece of audio, when I listened to this publicly available communication from the FBI, I wondered, what unconscious undercurrents may reside within these statements? What involuntary sleep-talking-like messages may I be able to decrypt from this special agent in charge? And in fact, there was a very interesting piece of information that I derived. Let's listen together as I hear Special Agent in Charge Gregory Bretzing say, "A sniper payback." A sniper payback. Well, what on earth does that mean? And where does this clip come from? Well, it's derived simply from his natural speech. It's this segment of his speech here.
At the appropriate time.
It's the natural speech of Special Agent in Charge Gregory Bretzing, put through a mirror filter. I've just reversed the audio. I've mirrored or reflected it to detect sleep-talking-like communications in which I hear the agents say the words, a sniper payback. And so what would lead Special Agent in Charge Gregory Bretzing to utter such an involuntary statement? What was the issue of snipers attending the roadblock, of primacy to the FBI's perspective on outcomes of events in which there was an attempt to arrest and detain LaVoy Finicum, passengers, and numerous other parties who were to attend a meeting with Sheriff Palmer. It's as if, from my somewhat limited perspective, it's as if the notion of the sniper, the role of the sniper at the roadblock, was crucial to an outcome foreseen by the FBI, foreseen by the parties in charge. It's as if we were revisiting American history from the 20th century, in which President Kennedy was assassinated by a sniper fire, in which civil rights leader Martin Luther King was assassinated by sniper fire. The sniper playing this primary principal role in domestic policy in the United States, a history-changing role, and LaVoy Finicum seemingly embodying the latest victim in a bloodbath, in what Sheriff Palmer described as an ambush, and which has become a very, very controversial event. Let's review some of these comments on social media that I've collected since the time I began to publish on this question. For example, from YouTube, I have the comments of someone who claims to be a former Oregon officer who states that the roadblock set up on the highway that impeded the progress of the vehicle driven by LaVoy Finicum, he said this was an illegal roadblock. He states it's not taught in the academy, and there is case law that states it's equivalent to deadly force. He cites federal law in the case of Tennessee versus Garner, which states you cannot use deadly force against fleeing felons unless those felons pose a direct threat to you or the public. He states neither was the case here, and in fact, in Oregon, the only way they were guilty of a crime, the only criminal acts were trespass and illusion, both of which are misdemeanors. This former Oregon officer is emphasizing that for the misdemeanor crime of illusion, it was as if summary justice, vigilante justice, was enacted upon LaVoy Finicum. I mean, that seems quite a brutal response and quite a questionable response in light of what is being cited here as case law. He goes on to say that this cornerstone of all police use of force cases is taught in the academy, but OSP, the Oregon State Patrol, clearly does it here anyway. He said they created exigent circumstances here that allowed them to shoot this man. He says it's not a good shoot. He says it's the equivalent of me tossing you a knife and then shooting you. Exigent circumstances, fabricating events, fomenting violence through the use of deadly force. I mean, it's just common sense that if there's a roadblock at a blind curve and no notice given to the parties who are approaching it, it's going to force a vehicle traveling at high speed. It's going to force it off the road, risking the lives, at a minimum, risking the lives of the passengers. They could die as a consequence of encountering a roadblock at high speed with no prior notice. Use of deadly force, and according to this officer, there's case law in place that says you can't use deadly force against a fleeing felon under a misdemeanor. He goes on to say that the fact that the troopers were not indicted only shows that the jury did not have all of the relevant evidence. He says just the info that he's posted there on YouTube would give serious doubt to finding them justified and at least allow a trial to prove themselves, that the officers who implemented the roadblock should be on trial to prove that they were justified. He goes on to say that this discussion doesn't even include shooting at the truck prior to the roadblock or shooting at LaVoy when he exited with his hands up. Well, imagine that, shooting at a truck full of people. Now, during the press conference, the sheriff said that they were shooting at the truck because they were trying to stop the vehicle. But let's just play a game of role play here and switch roles. If this was a vehicle full of law enforcement officers and members of the public were opening fire at a roadblock they had created upon that vehicle, would they not be charged with attempted murder? I mean, isn't there just a suggestion that the use of firepower against a vehicle full of people suggests that there'll be possible death or injury? I mean, is there any consideration for that? Not at the press conference. It was stated aloud that, well, they were just shooting in an attempt to stop the truck. I mean, no consideration for the lives of the passengers in that statement. And furthermore, well, really, what the crux of the matter comes down to is the shots fired as LaVoy emerged with his hands up, the universal sign of surrender that even illiterate people would understand. Well, it seems as if there was a posse of vigilantes who lay in wait, who were laying in wait in an attempt to create violence and bloodshed, and this is a highly questionable scenario. Now, don't get me wrong. I had written previously that in so many words that the entire standoff was a fool's errand in so many ways, and I had written that I written in caution that folks should not be drawn to that event. Constitutionally minded folks should not attend, should not participate, should not respond to the call of the Bundys and their militia group and become involved, because I anticipated a sting. But we'll get into that more. But let's look further at some of the other documentation that has emerged. The criminal complaint hosted at justice.gov. That's the United States Department of Justice. The criminal complaint signed by U.S. Magistrate Judge Stacey F. Beckerman on January 26, 2016, the day of the shooting, posted to the site. It omits the name LaVoy Finicum, or Robert LaVoy Finicum, under the list of defendants. Well, this brings into question whether any warrant for his arrest existed at the time of the first stop. United States District Court for the District of Oregon, United States of America versus Ammon Bundy, John Ritzheimer, Joseph O'Shaughnessy, Ryan Payne, Ryan Bundy, Brian Cavalier, Shauna Cox, and Pete Santilli. Those are the parties listed as defendants. Now, I may be naive, but isn't it the case that a criminal complaint is required prior to the issuing of a warrant? And this being the criminal complaint of record, the one referenced by all of the mainstream press discussing this case, it omits the name LaVoy Finicum. He is not listed as a defendant, as if there were, in fact, no warrant for his arrest at the time of the first stop. More questions that really need to be addressed. And what's more, there are now claims covered by the Oregonian, the major Oregon newspapers, mainstream newspapers, stating that there were missing bullet casings. And I quote, 5 FBI agents assigned to the traffic stop told investigators that none of them fired at Finicum's Dodge pickup after it crashed at their roadblock. Oregon investigators, however, concluded that one agent fired twice at the truck, hitting it once in the roof and missing on the second shot. It goes on to state that a state trooper later described to investigators seeing 2 rifle casings in the area where the agents were posted. Detectives tasked with collecting evidence didn't find the casings, police reports indicate. And furthermore, FBI aerial surveillance video shows that before the detectives could get there, the FBI agents searched the area with flashlights and then huddled, according to law enforcement sources who have seen the video. The group then broke, and one agent appeared to bend over twice and pick up something near where the 2 shots likely were taken, the sources told the Oregonian. Does this sound like tampering with evidence at a crime scene? I mean, is this legitimate? Is this credible? Is this justice? What happened to a nation of laws? What happened to a nation of laws? Is this just vigilantes acting under the color of law? Is this retribution? Is this street justice? If you stick your finger in the eye of the government, will there be bloodshed? In practice, this appears to be, from my limited perspective, what may have occurred. And so I wrote extensively. I wrote 2 pieces with analysis and news intelligence about this case. And we're going to listen to my analysis of some of the key speakers. We'll go now to the statements of Shauna Cox, who was on board the vehicle driven by Robert LaVoy Finicum, and she recorded what turned out to be very important video, because it has an intact soundtrack that was subsequently matched to the FBI aerial surveillance, which was absent of any sound. And apparently there were no dash cam videos or wearable video camera images or soundtracks available from the police, as if they had turned off all of their cameras or the evidence had disappeared. Shauna Cox provides what is presently available as seemingly the only soundtrack that matches events, and it provides perspective on events inside the cab of the vehicle during the first traffic stop leading up to the shooting, and after the shooting, the subsequent arrests of all the parties, the surviving parties. So we'll go now to this very dramatic audio from inside the cab. Listen to from Shauna Cox.
Okay, I don't know about numbers.
Well, I got numbers, but I can't call because we haven't called. No service.
Okay.
No, mobile network not available.
Do you have numbers for people here in town?
Yeah, but... Hey, on!
Okay, they're shooting.
Hey, on!
Okay, we're down. Okay, we're here.
Go ahead and shoot me!
Damn!
So there they are, the voices of those desperate fugitives from justice, those misdemeanor felons eluding police, being subject to gunfire at an unexpected roadblock, and perhaps even an illegal roadblock, being subjected to the use of deadly force in an attempt to prevent their flight from justice, or so it would seem. And yet when we listen to the reflections, the mirror audio, the secret messages, I can hear clearly the words murder, they're shooting people, murder.
Fire!
They're shooting.
Fire! Fire!
They're shooting.
Fire! Fire!
They're shooting.
Fire!
My goodness, that's very strong language. Murder. I mean, isn't this just justice? Isn't this peace and safety officers out, taking care of, duty and responsibility in the name of public interest? Well, this is very heated rhetoric, and it's unconscious on the part of the speakers. It's not voluntary that they would invoke such an image. It's more like someone who's sleep talking. How many people in the audience talk in their sleep or know somebody who talks in their sleep? You know that speaker has no control over their speech organs under those conditions. And I say these messages, these unconscious communications are just like that. They're involuntary on the part of the speaker. These messages are formulated in such a way as to give raw, unambiguous insight into the unconscious process of the speaker. And here, in that moment of drama, during being subject to gunfire, being subject to roadblock violence, the parties inside the cab are invoking the notion of murder. Now, we can only imagine with all the heated rhetoric that surrounded a 41-day occupation, how hyped up these parties may have been going into this event to begin with. These gun-toting militia individuals, there was a lot of hot rhetoric, to say the least, coming out of their camp prior to any of these events. And the heated rhetoric from LaVoy Finicum only compounds this image of very extreme notions and distorted states of mind, perhaps total lack of clarity under such violence. And yet it is telling, it leaves a lingering question related to the notion of justice that surrounds the events leading to the roadblock and the subsequent shootings and arrests. Was this in fact justice, or is this some sort of street retribution or payback, as Special Agent Bretzing was articulating in his own unconscious way? As to LaVoy Finicum, his statements I found telling. He is a tragic figure. Again, I am not someone who advocates individuals exercising their open carry rights to pick up a few donuts, strap on all of their gear and show off their armaments while they're picking up a cup of coffee and a chocolate bar, at the corner store. I'm certainly not a person who advocates for that. I think this is a form of extremism going on at the refuge with these armed militias. Well, absolutely. And yet, LaVoy Finicum emerges from these events as a tragic figure, and to some, he will remain a martyr. And this is a consequence of this whole sum of events. It's a social consequence of these events, perhaps an unavoidable consequence, but for greater reasons than any personal or individual responsibility, at least on the part of Finicum, who constantly taunted the police with incitement to shoot him. So let's listen to LaVoy Finicum from one of these excerpts from the Shawna video.
Okay, boys, this is going to get real. You want my blood on your hands? Get it done, because we got people to see and places to go.
Now, it's very inflammatory rhetoric on his part, and yet the unconscious speech says something different. It portrays him in a more sympathetic light, where I hear him say the words, "Slay me, let all of them go." And people were saying that LaVoy exited the vehicle with his hands raised and moved away from the vehicle as if he understood, well, the vehicle was already drawing fire en route to the roadblock, as if he understood that he was about to commit a sacrifice of some sort in order to save the lives of the others in the vehicle. And this unconscious, involuntary statement seems to support that. Let all of them go, he says. Slay me. Martyr me. Now, there are some people in social media who feel that is justification. These types of articulations and pronouncements provide justification for police to use deadly force. In other words, when we go in our communities, when we go up to the local peace officers and begin to make demands, shout demands at them, even from a distance, such as, give me your vehicle, or give me your money, or some other such outrageous statements, that the police are bound to comply, that the police will comply with the demands of the public if they are shouted repeatedly and loudly enough, as if that logic applies here. It's absolutely, of course, ridiculous and fallacious to suggest that just because an individual calls for the police to shoot at him, that provides justification for the police to open fire. I mean, the simple-mindedness of these claims, these condemning claims, are beyond my understanding. Certainly, I say again that the heated rhetoric emerging from the militia group, from the Bundy militia, was extreme. These parties were demonstrating, extreme states of mental distortion. They were displaying that in so many ways, and yet calls for the police to shoot somebody on the street. I don't see how that could ever provide grounds for police to act, to respond in the affirmative. I just don't see that at all. I don't see that as any form of justice or logic. And yet those opinions exist. From my reading of social media, people say he got what he asked for, he got what he deserved. Well, is America a nation of laws or a nation of vigilante street justice, a nation of retribution and payback? Is that really what the country is becoming? Is that what the society is becoming all about? Does this explain the violence at political campaign rallies? The simple-mindedness, this brutality type of approach. Is that really what our goal is? Is that what we're all working towards? Is that what people are fighting and dying to defend? I hardly think so. And yet we find these themes emerging through our study of this case, and I think these are important questions to ask. It is important to ask these questions and to consider the possible alternative answers that may emerge through independent studies and research. There are many reasonable questions to be asked, and it is my hope that the Department of Justice, in their pursuit of questions particularly related to the FBI agents, that these questions will receive some answers. Let me read to you from my article, which listeners in chat can have received the link, entitled "Murder, Secret Messages of the LaVoy Finicum Shooting, and Political Assassination." I published this article on March 9th upon the release of the Shawna video, in which I stated, exclusive new video published to YouTube on March 8th, 2016 reveals unconscious communications of key figures in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge occupation during their attempt to evade police, resulting in the shooting death of rancher LaVoy Finicum. Video from witness Shauna Cox, released by the Oregonian, captured from inside of the besieged vehicle what Grant County Sheriff Glenn Palmer reportedly cited as an ambush. In his prepared statement, the Malheur County District Attorney was said to have described the shooting as justified under state law allowing use of deadly force. Widow Jeanette Finicum maintains it was murder. Earlier News Inside Out coverage of the 2016 armed standoff near Burns, Oregon, highlighted analysis of occupation spokesperson Ammon Bundy, whose secret messages alerted readers to the presence of a paid government provocateur and a sting operation, while insinuating the presence of CIA Phoenix program-related snipers. More than one Malheur National Wildlife Refugee occupation protester was subsequently cited for suspicion of COINTELPRO activities, including Mark McConnell, who drove the vehicle in which Ammon Bundy was seated, and embedded radio host Pete Santilli. Subsequent reports of a massive ongoing sting claimed the FBI is believed to be conducting a nationwide warrant roundup of protesters and independent journalists involved in the recent protests and standoffs against the federal government. That elite FBI snipers are now under investigation by the U.S. Justice Department for shots fired that hit the vehicle driven by LaVoy Finicum as he emerged with hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender, appears to place events of January 26, 2016 within the well-worn domain of political assassination. It was sniper fire that turned the tide of protest in a 2014 Maidan conspiracy where a follow-up investigation identified a resurrected CIA Phoenix program encrypted within the remarks of Secretary of State Jon Kelly. NewsInsideOut.com reflected how, in the face of revolution against the elected government of the Ukraine, the Secretary evokes a reinvigorated CIA Phoenix program, which had formerly operated from 1965 through 1972, which, according to an online CIA retrospective, sought destruction of the political infrastructure of targeted nations. The role of the American sniper in late 20th century domestic politics is attested by the shooting deaths of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. More recently, the 2015 San Bernardino mass shooting that preceded the Oregon occupation was colored by the presence of craft mercenaries, as outlined in a two-part NewsInsideOut.com report that linked this event to the 2013 Boston bombing. It goes on to state that although Ammon Bundy is currently under arrest facing trial, it does not exonerate him from suspicion in the same way that heiress Patty Hearst was shown to be a CIA NOC domestic operative during the SLA terrorism incidents of the 1970s, who was subsequently tried and received a presidential pardon. And it concludes that more information concerning the Oregon standoff protesters' status is certain to emerge with the fullness of time. And so we are patient. Justice is patient. We will watch and wait and see what further may emerge. But in the meantime, let's go to my earlier study of Ammon Bundy. Let's take a look at what I had discovered in my articles where I named Ammon Bundy agent provocateur, secret messages disclose concealed government payments, CIA Phoenix programs ties in Oregon federal building occupation. This was published January 4th, 2016. It was very prescient in terms of identifying events that were to come, as we had just noted. This is Ammon Bundy from January 3rd, 2016.
The federal authorities
no, we haven't heard from any of them. We hope they're home with their families, if they have families. We intend them no harm. We know that many of those employees at one time were working for ranchers or as ranchers and loggers, and they were forced to leave those industries that many of them had for many generations. They were forced to leave them and go find a government job. And now, Harney County, the U.S. government is the highest employer in the county. And
so he raises concerns about government, the BLMs taking over the private lives of the ranchers, the rights of the ranchers, the economic base being dependent on the BLM, and the government apparently attempting to run society in this small town. I found more information here through my mirror filter. His unconscious speech says to me, "Government's paying me, conceal my bad money." And he goes on to state in his own unconscious way, a deal with the trooper.
A deal with trooper. A deal with trooper. A deal with trooper.
A deal with trooper? Does this guy have some sort of secondary and tertiary agendas? Is he hiding behind this militia persona? Or really, he's fronting for a government operation, the massive sting that was cited in later articles after my first report? The red flags of suspicion rode high upon my first listening to this audio. And there was more audio from Mr. Bundy. Let's listen to further statements from that same date, the same interview. Oh, excuse me, this is from January 2nd, 2016.
We have basically taken over the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And this will become a base place for patriots from all over the country to come and to be housed here and live here. And we're planning on staying here for several years. And while we're here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be freeing these lands up and getting the ranchers back to ranching, getting the miners back to mining, getting the loggers back to logging, and where they can do it under the protection of the people and not be afraid of this tyranny that's going to come upon them.
You see, to hear him speak aloud, this is direct action. This is activism in the economic interests of the local population. For the good of the people, the militia has stepped in, or so we are led to believe. And yet, in an unconscious way, I hear him say the words, call it, captured all of you. You know I'm a threat here now. We're meeting this terror time, this terror meeting.
Call it, captured all of you. You know the capture now, when you this terror meeting. Call it, captured all of you. You know the capture now, when you this terror meeting. Call it, captured all of you. You know the capture now, when you this terror meeting.
As if he was inciting the notion of terrorism, as if this would become a case of counter-terrorism to justify further FBI budgets. You know, the FBI is continuously cited as the fabricator of terrorist incidents and terrorist plots in the United States. They're continuously cited for this, that they intercepted the alleged terrorists in a just-in-time scenario after having previously provided them with all of the bomb-making materials and other maps and plans that they would need to execute some sort of evil plot. This is the reputation of the FBI in the present day, and really it's indicative of individuals attempting to secure budgets, you know, to show that they're actually doing something. Look, we're stopping all this terrorism. It's just really an attempt to secure budgets. This is for-profit justice, it would seem. The FBI has a really bad reputation in the alternative press for this. It's widely known. This is not some new disclosure. Furthermore, I hear Mr. Bundy say the words criminal plan, the Phoenix.
I don't want the Phoenix. I don't want the Phoenix. I don't want the Phoenix.
Criminal plan, the Phoenix. He's invoking the Phoenix, like the Phoenix program, a thread that I had been following since my earlier studies of the Maidan conspiracy in the Ukraine, a reinvigorated Phoenix program that attempts to destabilize governments, a COINTEL plot to capture all of the militia, all of the revolutionaries. You see, early on in the Malheur standoff, there were indications of a sting. There were indications of secondary and tertiary agendas. There was indications that this was entrapment or attempted entrapment. And how bizarre, how peculiar that the roadblock that entrapped the parties who attempted to elude police, resulting in death, mirrored and reflected this concept. The trap was sprung. The parties were entrapped. They were encircled by police, and majority of them are under arrest, but not without bloodshed, not without one killing, one death, one martyrdom. It's really quite telling. Why do I pursue this research? You know, is there any grounds to believe, in other words, that my claims are credible, that these statements have any validity? Maybe we should dovetail back into some of my reporting history over the last 20 years and look at some of the intelligence successes that this procedure had produced, just to help provide some balance. I mean, these are extraordinary claims, you may agree, that I'm uttering tonight, and yet they are grounded in factuality. They are grounded in reality. They are grounded in a track record of excellence in anticipating global events. Let's quickly segue off of the Malheur Refuge timeline back to 2001 and the election of President George W. Bush and his inaugural address.
And to all nations, we will speak for the values that gave our nation birth.
President George W. Bush talking about traditional values. In reverse, I heard him say the words mission of Baghdad.
Mission of Baghdad. Mission of Baghdad. Mission of Baghdad.
I reported that the Monday following the inaugural address and subsequently on hundreds of radio stations throughout the United States and all over the world. That finding was very telling. A mission of Baghdad, what could that have meant in January of 2001? The benediction by the pastor that followed the president's inaugural stated this:
Deliver us from these and all other evils and cast our sins into your sea of forgetfulness.
And when I listened to that through the mirror, I heard the words missile attack.
Missile attack. Missile attack. Missile attack.
A missile attack in a mission of Baghdad? Well, is that not the shock and awe strikes against Baghdad, Iraq, that commenced the Iraq War, that inaugurated the war in Iraq, the longest war in United States history? Is that not the case? And is it not true that this was being reported 2 years before that war began? You can find the air check, the Monday morning air check on YouTube that I've published from the station with the station logo on the label. That show is still on the air in Spokane, Washington. You can call the station and ask if Jon Kelly was the guest. This is fact. This is reality. This is a matter of public knowledge that this report was issued 2 years prior, that with military precision it identified the location and the military technology that was involved in these shock and awe strikes with great precision. Great precision. This wasn't the only case in which this level of precision was achieved. Using the same procedure, I identified a notorious killer in Wichita, Kansas, prior to his confession, and I did it in the most obtuse way, the most indirect way possible you could possibly imagine. I followed a thread of extremely exotic evidence derived from the speech of Dennis Rader, who was a city ticketing officer, a city compliance officer, who had been arrested on suspicion of breaking at home invasion, murders, and torture of members of the public living in Wichita, Kansas through the 1970s. Let's listen to Dennis Rader's jailhouse statements while he was held on suspicion.
So now that party is going to be subpoenaed in, or has been subpoenaed in. I cannot talk to that party. They keep coming here for visits.
And through the mirror, I understood that Dennis Rader said the demons influenced that guy. Demonic influence, I mean, what does that mean? Well, in the case of the BTK killer, it has tremendous significance because, you see, it was known to police that the authentic killer was writing letters to both police and local journalists in the 1970s, taunting them in letters, "You'll never catch me," and so on, and including details of the crime scenes that were only known to a party who had attended the scene of the crime. In other words, police forces will release limited information to the public about the nature of criminal activities in attempts to mitigate false positives, fraudulent claims of fraudulent confessions from parties who had nothing to do with the crime. This was not widely known to the public at the time, but these letters were vetted by the police, and they said only the authentic killer could have written such letters. And those letters included statements about demonic possession. The killer himself, in his letters to police and journalists, said, "I'm possessed by demons." This became a very important clue. I aired this report on Wichita Morning Radio 15 minutes before Dennis Rader was to appear for a pretrial hearing before the judge, at which he confessed to all of the BTK crimes, all of the crimes, in really horrific detail. It was disgusting behavior that was confessed in its entirety at the pretrial hearing, and I announced my findings 15 minutes before on local radio in Wichita. 2 weeks later, Dennis Rader is again on his way to serve his sentence, and now in another jailhouse interview, he talks specifically to the demonic possession issue.
I just know it's the dark side of me that it controls me. I personally think it's not Christians. I actually think it's demons.
What a bizarre coincidence. My findings stated that the demons influenced that guy.
Did he perceive what I'm saying?
The demons influenced that guy. The demonic influence was the clue that led me to give a positive identification to the confessed killer prior to his confession. I mean, that's pretty esoteric. That's really occult. That's quite a severe demonstration. From thousands of miles away, relying only on the speech signal, I was able to make this positive identification, and the facts of the case conspired to support my claims in such a way that the speaker spoke aloud, overtly, that he believed was demonically possessed. Those findings were vetted. They were vetted as forensically precise. It was a precise identification. It was based on a very obscure thread of evidence, and yet it turned out to be true. So when I make such claims, you see, about Ammon Bundy, when I make such claims about LaVoy Finicum and their unconscious speech, this is not entirely speculative. This is not some abstract that I just made up over a cup of coffee this morning. This is actually grounded in research that has withstood the test of time consistently. Talk about identifying Russian spies. Anna Chapman, notorious Russian spy, was captured and extradited along with her gang in the last decade, in the previous decade, and she had posed in New York as a job seeker at a job fair where all of the job seeker interviews were videotaped. And so I found this very interesting recording of this Russian spy undercover pretending to be a job seeker. Let's listen to her talk to the human resources professional.
Be scared, do it anyway. And not only that, you have a lot of people that got long way to success. And you have many people that are thinking about doing this, going this way, this direction. So it's very important to bring these two parts together when someone can see that this can happen, and inspire them to go forward with their ideas.
And you can read my coverage of Anna Chapman on newsinsideout.com. What did she say? Well, I heard her say, let's pull a Vegas drop with Tim. So you see, by the time I had encountered the story, Anna Chapman had already been caught and deported. She had already been identified. Her cover had been blown. But this other party, her associate, Tim, this individual, that name did not surface until 9 months after my report in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal depended on inside sources to find the name Tim Foley amongst the accomplices of Anna Chapman. Tim Foley, the youth accomplice. I ID'd Tim Foley 9 months before the Wall Street Journal in this report. And again, that article on newsinsideout.com has the links. You can see the time and date stamps on the third-party servers. I can't make those timestamps appear. I can't fake those. Those are independent hosts, independent documentation of the timeline in which this report was issued. She names Tim in a Vegas drop. Tim, it's clear as a bell. Tim Foley was named 9 months later by the Wall Street Journal. I beat the Wall Street Journal by 9 months. The Wall Street Journal relied on inside sources. I did it entirely based on the speech signal alone. What's a Vegas drop? The Hotel Las Vegas in New York, of course, where all of the shenanigans were taking place. Hotels are notorious as information drop sites for spies all over the world. I believe they were using this decrepit hotel, the Hotel Las Vegas, as a drop site, and that Tim Foley was an accomplice in those matters, and that Anna Chapman articulated that in such a clear manner as I was able to detect it. Those findings were meaningful. When I make these claims about LaVoy Finicum, when I make these claims about Ammon Bundy, it's not based entirely on speculation. It's not just guesswork on my part. It's actually founded on an applied skill that has withstood the test of time. Identified Russian spies, identified serial killers, identified war crimes yet to come. Well, really, it's quite astounding when we think of the track record of this research. Let's take one more example from the history files, which is Edward Snowden, the notorious NSA whistleblower, the celebrity whistleblower, currently residing in Russia. He says he'll come back to America if they'll give him a free trial, a fair trial. Well, if Edward Snowden had been following events in Oregon, he would know that vigilante justice is hot on the minds of federal agents. The role of the sniper is primary in American domestic policy. He may find himself on the receiving end of a high caliber rifle. It's entirely possible in my imagination. Well, what did he say? When he first emerged in an interview from Hong Kong, Edward Snowden had this to say.
The only thing that restricts the activities of the surveillance state are policy. Even our agreements with other sovereign governments, we consider that to be a stipulation of policy rather than a stipulation of law. And because of that, a new leader will be elected. They'll flip the switch, say that because of the crisis, because of the dangers that we face in the world, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority. We need more power. And there will be nothing that people can do at that point to oppose it. And it'll be turnkey tyranny.
Turnkey tyranny. Well, there he's talking about tyranny. He's talking about injustice. What did he say in his unconscious remarks? I was able to detect the words, those UFOs. Well, strangely enough, subsequently, and I don't know if it took a year or longer for The Intercept to publish the UFOs in the Edward Snowden NSA cache of stolen materials, but Edward Snowden's cache of NSA materials, in fact, contained UFO PowerPoint slides, as if this fellow had some connection to information. He was a system administrator on a network, which seems to imply that he had a superseding authority to look into files stored on servers that individual users under compartmentalization may not have access to, but as system admin, he had a superseding authority that allowed him access to all kinds of crazy information. I think he had a look at the NSA UFO files, is my suspicion. But most importantly, I reported this long before Edward Snowden was paired with UFO and ET issues, and it subsequently, Neil deGrasse Tyson was interviewing Edward Snowden in the last 6 months, I believe, and Edward Snowden is now in the mainstream media becoming a spokesperson about UFO and ET issues. If anyone remembers that interview, Edward Snowden is being positioned as the UFO guy in the mainstream media, but at the time of my report, it was entirely antagonistic to any concept that Edward Snowden and UFOs or extraterrestrials had anything to do with each other. This was, I was really out on a limb seemingly at that time, and yet the test of time showed that my findings were entirely relevant. I have more Edward Snowden material, and we might get into that in the second hour. Really an interesting study. There's a 3-part series on newsinsideout.com, my coverage of Edward Snowden, his ETs, his UFOs. He really goes in depth. He seems to have a lot to say about this issue. And I really want to emphasize, I was the first person to put the two people together in an evidence-based way. It wasn't just a guess or an assumption on my part. I could hear it in his own voice. I published the statements. I published the audio at that time. And so coming back to these questions related to Ammon Bundy, relating to the militia standoff, relating to FBI snipers and the primacy of the FBI snipers in the minds of the special agent who speaks to the public about these issues, about the shootings, about the arrests. Well, it just seems to me that the role of the snipers this is really the time of the sniper, this late 20th century, early 21st century. The role of the sniper plays a principal role in determining history, in determining outcomes, in major events, both domestic and foreign. We can look back to the connection between craft mercenaries and the San Bernardino mass shooting. Just prior, the major, collective trauma just prior to the Malheur Refuge standoff in San Bernardino, California, in which I wrote for newsinsideout.com, that's the San Bernardino mass shooting linked to 2013 Boston Marathon bombing via craft mercenaries seen at both events. And so here we have exclusive new video published to YouTube on December 8th, 2015, purports to reveal how San Bernardino police officers responding to reports of a mass shooting involuntarily disclosed the role of secret government mercenaries in both the tragic events of last week and the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. How many listeners in the audience saw the videos from the Burns, Oregon area post shooting videos in which seeming mercenaries were acting as sheriff's deputies, and that members of the public were approaching them, asking them who they were and what they were doing, standing around with their excessively modified assault rifles. They didn't look like regular police, and they didn't respond as public servants. People assert that in fact there were armed mercenaries on site in Oregon fomenting. There are claims of violence, there are claims of hostilities and aggression. It's kind of crazy, but this notion that Blackwater type, craft type mercenaries are involved in domestic operations arises in the Burns, Oregon case, in the Malheur Refuge case. It arises in San Bernardino as well, in the strangest sort of way. Let's read further from this article, which states that the Dallas Morning News reported in 2013 how the widow of American sniper Chris Kyle, Tanya Kyle, filed a lawsuit against private military contractor Kraft International LLC, the company founded by her deceased husband, including a statement requesting to stop using the skull and crosshairs logo designed by Chris Kyle. NewsInsight.com's previous report identifying a sniper at the scene characterized by the presence of drugs and a skull echoed the facts of an earlier study in which it had been determined that the American sniper was addicted to heroin, a substance known for its use in CIA MKUltra programs. Two men dressed in Kraft International military fatigues and logo apparel carrying black backpacks were said to have been photographed at the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. Now, there are contrary reports from the National Guard that these parties adorned in third-party logos and badges were, in fact, National Guard. But that claim seems kind of crazy. It's as if military service members are now NASCAR drivers adorned with logos and badges from KFC to Burger King while on duty in public service. Doesn't that just seem a little kind of nutty to consider that members of the military services are wearing logo wear from other institutions that have nothing to do with their duty? That seems kind of out of place. That seems illogical and irrational. And yet there seems to be an identification here in San Bernardino related to this. It says new analysis of the police dispatch audio released by San Bernardino police has detected statements in which persons known to police are cited for throwing the mass shooting comparable to a job in Boston. So let's take a quick look while we're coming up to the top of the hour. Let's take a quick look at two of these clips from San Bernardino. And I think this is very interesting. It deepens our notion of the threat of the sniper, our notion of the domestic mercenaries. And I'm just scanning here my material. Here's a witness to San Bernardino giving her statement to the press.
I couldn't see his face. He had a black hat on, and from my view, all I could see was just a black hat and black long sleeve shirt, possibly gloves on. He had black cargo pants on, the kinds with the zippers on the sides and the big puffy pockets. He had a huge assault rifle, and he had extra ammo. He's coming ready for something.
This is witness testimony from the scene of a crime. Is there more information that can be decrypted from that testimony to help investigators determine who the party was that she saw? I believe there is. I heard her say, the sniper, drug, skull, die. The sniper. She's talking about snipers. She's talking about skulls and drugs. And we've already identified that the wife of Chris Kyle has been filing lawsuits requesting people to stop using the skull and crosshairs logo. The skull and crosshairs logo. What on earth is she talking about? You know, we're coming up. We've just got another minute till we come up to our break, and so we're going to leave you there and say, you know, I've got more to say about snipers and domestic operatives at mass shooting events in the United States, at the shooting of LaVoy Finicum. I've got a lot more to say in our second hour, and we're going to be taking your calls as well. So if you've got calls and questions, you're welcome to call in, and we'll talk further about the primacy of the American sniper. And welcome back. We're in our second hour. You're listening tonight to The Story Behind the Story with Dr. Ott. Dr. Ott is on the road, and I'm Jon Kelly. I'm the guest host for tonight, presenting the primacy of the American sniper. my coverage of LaVoy Finicum, Ammon Bundy, the Bundy militia, the Malheur refuge standoff, the shooting of LaVoy Finicum, and all of the crazy circumstances that seem to surround this case, the ongoing questions that are raised, many questions that have been raised in this case, and we're just exploring a narrow angle, one person's analysis of these issues, and yet I feel there's a story of national interest underneath this. The primacy of the American sniper in domestic and foreign policy is real, is a part of making history in the present day, and may continue for some time. We'll be taking a deeper look at that and taking your calls during this hour. But before we go there, just want to remind you that Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com is listener-supported radio. And if you're like me and you think the team that's making this show happen, the people working behind the scenes to make tonight's broadcast happen are doing a wonderful job, then why don't you go to their site and go to the support page and take a look at how you can contribute and make a donation to the station and help them stay on the air and keep fine programming like tonight's show, keep it on the air, help these guys have another great season. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, go to the support page and check it out. And so we were talking in the last hour, we were just wrapping up our discussion about San Bernardino and how two men dressed in Kraft International military fatigues and logo apparel carrying black backpacks were said to have been photographed at the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. And you see the photograph that was published showed the Punisher skull on the cap of one of the parties. The National Guard subsequently stated that all military personnel on site were in fact National Guard members, and yet I say, people in military service don't dress like NASCAR drivers, covering themselves in logos and banners from third parties like KFC and Double Mint Gum. That's just not the way it goes. And there are other people in social media who've been part of military service who say the same thing, that wouldn't stand in that culture, in that climate. They don't make up fancy dress costumes with third-party logos. There's other reasons to believe that in fact these people were Kraft mercenaries. And the secret messages of one of the witnesses talks about a sniper, drugs, and a skull and death, as if she's invoking the Punisher skull, the death's head figure. Now there's more audio from San Bernardino that emerged, which was the police scanner audio, which I thought was quite telling as well. It was just worth looking into. When the police released their radio communications, it was quite a provocative opportunity to study and to learn more about the undercurrents amongst the first responders who were dealing with these issues, who were communicating with each other, the unnamed first responders, the public health and safety officers who were out on the streets patrolling, who were involved in events surrounding the mass shootings of late last year. Let's listen to that scanner audio. Let's see what we can decrypt from these statements.
729, I think they might be 40 King on another pursuit. They do. Under 12, are you still on my air?
In this clip, I hear the words, "We did that, we sure did," spoken by two of the distinct voices of the police.
We did that. We sure did. We did that. We sure did. We did that.
It's like listening to the police sleep talking while they work. These are involuntary statements on their part. They can't consciously control the statements. They're involuntary. They're unconscious. Just like people who talk in their sleep. If you in the audience know someone who talks in their sleep, they really don't have any control over what they're saying under those conditions. And I say that these reports are rich in this type of unconscious communication that informs us in factual ways about matters pertaining to events. And I demonstrated in the last hour that the Iraq War was foreseen in such a way. The idea of the BTK killer was foreseen in such a way. The identity of the accomplice to a Russian spy was foreseen in such a way. And the UFOs in Edward Snowden's NSA stolen cache, yes, they were identified in such a manner as well. So let's listen further to the police dispatch, because I think that these officers had something to tell us. And one way to find out was to decrypt their statements.
And NORAD 2 to those teams going eastbound, south of us. Try not to go south where that car is. Trying to come back east.
And so here we have two separate comments. The first stating, "No people, who's throwing this?"
No, loose, they're on there. No heat, slow loose, they're on there. No heat, slow loose, they're on there.
And further, the statement emerges which says, job in Boston. You know, and for the listeners who are just tuning in, where is this audio derived from? What have we done to decrypt these statements? Well, we just mirrored the statements of the police.
South of us. South of us.
He gives the statement, job in Boston. Job in Boston. You know, is it just me, or does this sound like they're talking about an inside job with foreknowledge, with insight? I mean, is there some sort of conspiracy being invoked by these messages? Here's one more statement from that police scanner.
San Bernardino, Mountain View, do not go westbound. Shut it down.
What does it say? Unconsciously, I hear the words, you're a Mason.
You're a Mason. You're a Mason. You're a Mason.
The Masons, my goodness. Well, isn't it odd that a Masonic headdress was featured in mainstream media San Bernardino mass shooting at one of the interviews? Isn't that odd that a gentleman wearing a baseball cap adorned with a Masonic symbol, clearly, easily identifiable, was on the cable news, on television, talking about these events as if they were making some sort of display, as if there was some sort of subliminal programming, some sort of communication, some sort of statement regarding Masonic involvement. And here it is paralleled, it's reflected in the unconscious statements from the police scanner, those unidentified officers courageously patrolling and serving the public, are giving voice to a climate of conspiracy, a climate of an inside job, and associating events in San Bernardino with the tragic events in Boston, a job in Boston. The skull-wearing, drug-addled sniper is cited in the sleep-talking-like statements of witness Sally Abdel-Magid, becomes like a black skull-cap-bearing craft private contractor mercenary, akin to a member of a team whose duties straddle participating in domestic, secret, state-sponsored terror from sea to shining sea, or so it would seem, I wrote, for newsinsideout.com. How akin this may be to domestic CIA operations that seek to destabilize governments and societies. Destabilizing societies, isn't that one of the CIA agendas? But inward-directed CIA domestic operations, isn't that entirely illegal? It seems those programs are running in full force domestically. It seems that mercenaries, for-profit soldiers of fortune, are playing a role, and that the FBI is also involved. It seems that this is one of the undercurrents of contemporary society, and it's necessary for us to understand. It's necessary for us to comprehend the scope of these issues, the conspiracy, the criminal racket that is occurring under the color of law, that is being that the parties who've been entrusted with oversight of such behaviors have seemingly abandoned their posts and abdicated their duty to the public to protect the public from these terrible, terrible events and these shooting tragedies. So we've looked at San Bernardino. We've made a connection between snipers and San Bernardino and craft mercenaries in Boston and San Bernardino. And I wrote the headline "American Sniper in San Bernardino" based on these findings. It's on newsinsideout.com. And all of the audio you're hearing tonight, there's videos attached to each of these articles. You can hear the audio yourself. That Juan Hernandez told NBC affiliate WMGT that he saw 3 white men in military fatigues leave the scene of the crime. I mean, is this like 9/11, where you've got all these witness statements that are eventually overlooked or excluded, and yet they appear shortly after events or shortly within the time frame of events, but are subsequently overlooked? I mean, where's the follow-up on these 3 white men in military fatigues? Are these the drug skull guys, the snipers? Are these the craft mercenaries on site? I think it's highly telling. I think the findings are telling. I think there's reasons to believe that there's something of substance to these findings, and that we need to further explore these avenues of investigation. You see, again, when we go back to looking at events in the Ukraine, which are like, frontline World War III fomenting type of events, in case we haven't been keeping up to date on what's happening in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, where the democratic government was overthrown in a mob riot that was fomented by sniper fire, and that is, creating the front lines for World War III between the United States and Russia. I mean, it's kind of, end of the world, the zombie apocalypse type of scenario is being fomented. It's a hotspot. It's a global hotspot. Syria, the most recent hotspot of potential confrontation between the United States and Russia. Russia withdrawn, in a surprise move, withdrawing forces from Syria, claiming victory. And perhaps rightly so, is certainly showing an incredible display of skill in executing their military actions in Syria in defense of the democratically elected government. Well, in the Ukraine, the democratically elected government was overthrown in an Arab Spring-like uprising, and it was the role of the sniper that turned the tide of protest into a mass uprising and a coup that drove the government out. And Ukraine at this point appears to have achieved the status of failed nation under the new government. Talk about a mess. Talk about a disaster. Talk about the consequences of playing God with other countries. I mean, really something going on there. I had some amazing findings in my study of the Ukraine situation, the Maidan conspiracy, and they relate directly. They take us all the way back through the sniper theme, through the craft mercenaries theme. There's a lot to say there. So why don't we listen to some of the related audio? This is related to the role of the sniper in foreign policy and the Arab Spring uprisings of the Maidan conspiracy. Urmas Paet is the Estonian politician who was revealed in a wiretapped phone call talking to an official from the European Union about the sniper events post-event, in which the doctors on site examining the bodies determined that the same snipers had fired both upon police and upon the rioters. Obviously, it was not one party shooting at the other, but rather a third party creating a crisis on site. And this, by the way, is one of the theories that surrounds the shooting of LaVoy Finicum, that the active snipers at the roadblock where LaVoy Finicum was shot, one shot was accounted for as hitting the truck, and a second shot, which can be clearly heard in the soundtrack from Shauna Cox, the second shot they suspect was fired at the police in order to incite return fire, a fatal response. There is suspicion by thoughtful observers that this is the case, that it's like a Maidan Square scenario where the sniper fires on both parties in an attempt to incite them to violence. Let's listen to Urmas Paet talk about the sniper fire on both parties.
It's integrity problems, Crimea, all this stuff. Region's party was absolutely upset. They say that, well, they accept this, that now there will be new government and there will be extraordinary elections, but there is enormous pressure against the members of parliament, that there are uninvited visitors during the night to party members.
Again, this is a wiretap call. Supposedly, it was tapped by members of the former intelligence services under the former government and released to the Russians, I believe. These folks did not know they were being taped or that this would be published, and it created quite a stir when it was released. Well, I heard the gentleman from Estonia say the words, "This guy loved the death head."
This guy loved the shit. This guy loved the shit. This guy loved the shit.
And what is a death head if not a skull? A skull, just like the Kraft mercenary logo, the Punisher skull, the preferred symbol of Chris Kyle, the celebrated American sniper. What on earth is the death head doing in the speech of the Estonian government member in reference to snipers in Kiev, if in fact he was not talking about craft-related mercenaries on site? It's highly suspicious that this thread leads us to Kiev, where the same symbol described in San Bernardino, in the witness statements in San Bernardino, the same symbol manifests in the Maidan conspiracy. The primacy of the sniper in domestic and foreign policy is highlighted through such a statement. Let's go further into the statement of the statements of the EU member. And just to clarify that the thrust of my story at the time emphasized British involvement. Well, you see, it may in fact have been commissioned by the Queen of England that such sniper fire occurred, and that American mercenaries were the team chosen for those events, or to participate, or were party to, if not training, if not executing those events. But clearly in my story, when I covered this initially, I identified English involvement. Let's listen to Catherine Ashton from the EU.
And I said to the opposition leaders shortly to become government, you need to reach out to Maidan, you need to be, engaging with them. You also need to get ordinary police officers back on the streets under a new sense of their role so that people feel safe. I said to the part of the region's people, you have to go and lay flowers where the people died. You have to show you understand what has happened here.
Absolutely.
Because what you're experiencing is anger.
Well, there it is. What does she say? The English Queen, Maidan's conspiracy. The English Queen, Maidan's conspiracy. She's talking about Elizabeth Windsor, the President Queen of England. She's citing the Queen of England in a Maidan conspiracy. What on earth? What the what? It's as if she was fingering the Queen of England as instrumental in fomenting the civil riots and the Arab Spring that overthrew the democratically elected government of the Ukraine. It's as if the Brits just couldn't get over the Crimean War of the 19th century, and they had to revisit and create, participate in pushing Ukraine into a complete failed state disaster situation. I mean, they are in massive debt. They have to negotiate just to try to get gas to keep their people warm during the winter. I mean, it's really a tragedy, and it's grounds for tremendous violence pending. It's still a front line on a potential World War scenario, a hypothetical World War scenario. So this viciousness, this international viciousness, that she's fingering Queen Elizabeth Windsor in the Maidan conspiracy, and that Mr. Payet, the Estonian member, is talking about a death head, as if he was somehow conceptualizing the Punisher skull of the craft mercenary as party to the sniper events. This is a discussion about the shooting upon the crowd and upon police in an attempt to invoke violence, paralleling the potential shot of the FBI agent into the police area, into the OSP, in an attempt to incite a violent response, a shooting response, which ultimately did occur. They ultimately shot LaVoy Finicum to death. It's not unlike the same program running in both situations. It's not unlike a domestic CIA Phoenix operation. And so where did this Phoenix operation theme emerge, if not from the speech of Secretary of State Jon Kelly, who was in the Ukraine subsequent to the change in government? He was highly visible and speaking on many occasions, and I captured him in this one event talking about events in the Ukraine.
It was very moving, and it gave me a deep personal sense of how closely linked the people of Ukraine are to not just Americans, but to people all across the world who today are asking for their rights, asking for the privilege to be able to live, defining their own nation, defining their futures. That's what this is about.
The Maidan uprising is an awesome scenario, according to the Secretary of State. It was just fantastic. It was something, that aligned with all of our highest values, according to his statement. And yet there's an undercurrent of conspiracy deep within, encrypted within his statements, in which I hear him say the word scary. The Phoenix sat up.
Yeah, the Phoenix sat up. The
Phoenix sat up. Well, isn't that what Ammon Bundy was talking about? The same symbolism, the Phoenix. Let's go back to that statement from Ammon Bundy. That little clip from Ammon Bundy where he talked about the criminal plan, the Phoenix. As if Ammon Bundy was aware of the Phoenix symbolism in the Burns, Oregon Malheur Wildlife Refuge, as if Jon Kelly was aware of Phoenix symbolism. What on earth was Jon Kelly referring to? The CIA's Phoenix program of the Vietnam War, of which Jon Kelly was a veteran, and upon his emergence from service, became an outspoken anti-war activist. Is it possible that Jon Kelly knew about the crimes committed under the CIA Phoenix program at the time of the war? And is he reflecting on a reinvigorated CIA Phoenix program evident through the mass shootings and the Arab Spring of the Maidan conspiracy? It seemed highly likely in my mind when I wrote about the Maidan conspiracy and the British Black Ops in Kiev sniper attacks. I highlighted this point. I wrote at that time, this article was from December 14th, 2014, and this was reprinted from earlier publication in Examiner.com. You know, I must say that if you find anything that I've said tonight to be just a little bit controversial, you're not alone in that camp. For this content and this type of investigative work that I've been doing for nearly 20 years has been subject to a substantial censorship, including a column on Examiner.com. It was highly read and widely distributed through mainstream news. My content was appearing on USA Today, Dallas Morning News, Newsday, Wall Street Journal. All the major editorial rooms in the English-speaking world were reading my stories and putting them on their websites. University of California, Irvine today, right on the front page of their website, my stories about this method, about this investigative method and its findings were widely touted in mainstream news. And yet, Examiner saw fit to strip my entire column off their site. 200,000 words or more of investigative reporting on a wide variety of issues were censored, taken away. All the links from Huffington Post and Forbes.com, all of the sites that had covered my work and linked to my work, those links were all broken in one swoop, one keyboard stroke, eliminated all those links and censored my work from the web, which was subsequently reinvigorated at newsinsideout.com. So if you think my findings are controversial, my statements about these cases are controversial, you're not alone. This work has been subject to intensive censorship and continues to struggle to find a place. And how fortunate I am to be guest hosting tonight here at Revolution Radio while Dr. Ott is away. And so very grateful for a chance to share with you my findings. And I hope that you will consider some of the investigative leads that are suggested by these claims. I wrote at that time that an exclusive video published to YouTube on March 6, 2014 purported to reveal how a raid on Kiev conducted by British covert operatives was instrumental to sniper incidents that killed a reported 94 people during protests leading to the ouster of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. The Maidan conspiracy, British Black Ops raid in Kiev sniper attacks formulated this conclusion from digital reflections of a wiretap telephone call between European policymakers leaked to the internet on March 5th, 2014. And we've listened to some of the audio. There's more audio in that story, but it goes on to discuss what Mr. Kerry had to say. And I think that this point about the Phoenix was very important. Secretary Kerry talking about the Phoenix that sat up. What was he saying? From the most esoteric perspective, the initiatory themes invoked during the Meet the Press continued in Kiev with an Osiris-like archetype, reborn from its own ashes in the form of the Phoenix as a citation from his own Vietnam War experience. It can also be said that in the face of revolution against the elected government of the Ukraine, the Secretary invokes a reinvigorated CIA Phoenix program, which according to an online CIA retrospective sought destruction of the political infrastructure of targeted nations. Isn't that what happened in the Ukraine? That the political infrastructure, the standing government, the democratically elected government was removed, and they replaced it with a bunch of incompetence. Is that fair? who've subsequently destroyed the economy and their international relations. This is what was printed in that retrospective. It stated that the Phoenix program is arguably the most misunderstood and controversial program undertaken by the governments of the United States and South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. It was, quite simply, a set of programs that sought to attack and destroy the political infrastructure of the Lao Dong Party, hereafter referred to as Viet Cong infrastructure, or VCI, in South Vietnam. I said that within the initiatory context, Bonesman Kerry volunteers how, while operating openly in the capacity of United States Secretary of State, he also continues to serve as a covert operative of his secret spook brethren's initiatives, which, according to British American economist and historian Anthony C. Sutton, have previously included Wall Street support for both Bolshevik and National Socialist governments in 20th century Russia and Germany. That would be the Skull and Bones secret society who had backed the Bolshevik Revolution and the National Socialist government, known by the more common term Nazi government of Germany. And so I had identified a Phoenix program in the statements of Secretary of State Kerry, and I saw it arise again in the statements of Ammon Bundy, just, at the onset of the occupation, at the very beginning of the occupation. It was as if he was talking about the same thing, as if this destabilization of society, the chickens had come home to roost in the domestic arena, and that the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was a sting, and that there were globalist initiatives at play, globalist dramas and initiatives and agendas at play in this event. And I am led to continue to believe, due to the perceptions of illegality upon the part of law enforcement who use deadly force against a misdemeanor illusion. It's just ridiculous to consider setting up a roadblock when it's illegal in Oregon to set up roadblocks, according to a former police officer, someone who says they're a former police officer on social media. It's illegal to do that. It's considered use of deadly force. It drove the Finicum vehicle off the road. They could have killed everybody just then. That vehicle could have rolled. It could have fallen off a cliff. Who knows? Everyone could have died just from that alone. But not only did they have a roadblock, they were firing upon the vehicle as it approached at high speed. They were firing upon this vehicle. Now, some might say, well, Finicum attempted to use the vehicle as a deadly weapon. He was obviously going to ram into the police cruisers and attempt to kill or injure the officers attending. But if we play a little game of role reversal and we populate the Finicum vehicle with police officers and say it was the militia members and their roadblock firing upon police, wouldn't charges of attempted murder resound in court? Wouldn't it be called attempted murder, an assault with a deadly weapon, and an attempted murder of the occupants of the vehicle? I mean, isn't that obvious? And yet, this was completely overlooked during the press conference, in which the sheriff stated clearly that the shots were fired simply in an attempt to stop the vehicle. That's all they were doing. They were just trying to stop the vehicle by opening fire on the vehicle and all the passengers. Now, I don't know what kind of skill sets those state patrol officers have in terms of marksmanship. It seems to me that there were next level elite sniper firepower was utilized at that site, as if there were better marksmen amongst the FBI team than what the state officers could muster. So it would seem to me, in other words, the chance that the errant stray bullet fire, from that exercise, the chances of it hitting passengers was substantial. There was a substantial possibility that someone may have been injured or killed due to bullet fire. And again, if you just turn the tables and populate that truck with police, and you tell me if that's not assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder. Well, those charges, those discussion points didn't make it to the press conference, but I think they're reasonable. They're reasonable, and at the very least, the use of a roadblock at a blind corner constitutes use of deadly force, because the driver who cannot foresee the roadblock ahead due to the blind curve at which it was established is forced to run off the road, threatening to injure or kill everybody on board. Now, during their press conference, at which the district attorney was seen to choke in a very, very emotional way. During that press conference, it was stated by the sheriff that, well, our pursuit vehicle stopped in time. So as if the Finicum was attempting to ram the roadblock. He said, well, you see, by way of comparison, our pursuit vehicle that was following the Finicum vehicle, it stopped in time. But of course, what they omitted to mention was that the pursuit vehicle was well aware of the roadblock. They knew aforehand that such a roadblock existed, and of course, they measured their speed and their use of the vehicle. They measured it in such a way that they could stop in time. Finicum was not given any notice aforehand. He drove into a trap, it would seem. And so, again, it's very questionable that the choked up district attorney, you should really watch that press conference, the choked up district attorney, as if this was his first day on the job, seemingly choking back a tear. Is it just due to the overall perceptions of lawfulness, or are there other considerations involved? I understand that there are people dying, seemingly being executed by police throughout the United States, and there are such reports coming through every week. We are seeing new reports. And there are Black Lives Matters activists who are concerned about the targeting of African Americans in the United States by police, and that there's prejudice and bias in the streets that are informing such decisions, and that these are crimes, and that there is limited justice being presented, that this is a concern. And so the death of one person, LaVoy Finicum, what's the big deal? It's just another police shooting. But due to circumstances, due to the politics surrounding it, due to the high profile of the case, it has become somewhat of an iconic case, somewhat of a symbol, and so worthy of discussion. But this is not to diminish the rights of the others who suffer in silence and whose voices have not been heard, the Native American people, the marginalized people, the homeless people who suffer different forms of police brutality. The justice must come to all these people. If it's to be a nation of laws, justice must be served equally. And as the district attorney said, without favor or fear, it must be justice for all parties concerned, for the credibility of this system to continue, for it to remain credible in the eyes of the public. It seems that we're at the rough edges of credibility at this point. It seems the mistakes and the cover-ups that the U.S. Department of Justice is investigating in the shootings by the FBI at the scene, with the tampered evidence, with the missing shell cartridges. It seems we're at the very rough edges of being able to, continue the charade that such conduct is lawful, that there wasn't an intent to kill, that people weren't laying in wait. During one of my discussions on social media, I highlighted this hypothesis that it was in fact LaVoy Finicum's flight from justice that incited the roadblock itself, that it was hastily assembled upon receiving notice that Finicum was fleeing from the first stop, and that they assembled all the snipers and the vehicles and the state police and the UAV that filmed the whole thing. They assembled the whole thing on short notice. This ridiculous hypothesis that it was that they were simply responding to this illusion misdemeanor, someone trying to escape from the police, became justification for this roadblock circus, which of course is ridiculous. And the parties who argued to the contrary were really had to reflect on the fact that all of this was assembled with forethought and planning and intention long before the first stop. It all comes down to intent. It's evidence of intent. It's intent and suggestive of intent to use deadly force. And deadly force was applied. They shot at the vehicle. They had set up a roadblock, which in itself is a use of deadly force because it can result in the death of the parties who are approaching it. And when Finicum emerged from his vehicle, as I wrote, with his hands raised in the universal symbol of surrender, even the illiterate understand what that means. The FBI opened fire at that time as well. You see, if his use of the vehicle was intended as a deadly weapon to cause injury or death to the police at the roadblock, that threat ended when the vehicle came to a full stop. And it was only when the vehicle came to a full stop that Finicum emerged from the vehicle, upon which the FBI opened fire. The soundtrack from Shauna Cox proves that, and there are subsequent claims reported in the mainstream press. The Oregonian says there's missing shell casings at the site. There's tampering with evidence. the U.S. Department of Justice is investigating. They are investigating this cover-up amongst the FBI agents. And it is highly suspicious that such events would occur and that such a noted party as the U.S. Department of Justice would take an interest in the case. This is not a fringe, tinfoil hat belief system. This is some sort of abstract, that just some crazy person came up with over a cup of coffee this morning. The U.S. Department of Justice thinks there's a problem, and we should take an interest in that. We should take an interest in parties who would seek to enact vigilante justice, who would seek to enact summary executions, who would seek to enact retribution and payback under the color of law. We should question that. We should investigate and determine the truth of these matters and try to find out how we can emerge from these tragic events, these difficult situations. We can emerge from them better people and a better society. This is our hope, that we can become alert and aware about the changes in our society, the change in tone and temperament that is raising serious questions about justice, the nature of justice, and the nature of government that we are in the system that we currently live under. Well, so this thread, you see, this thread has related to the sniper is quite indicting, it seems. It's quite indicting of secret government activities. It's quite indicting of domestic CIA operations and COINTEL FBI stings. It's quite indicting in my estimation. I've written extensively about it. I've written about it on newsinsideout.com. You can read all about it there. But there's more to say about this. There's more articles. There's more discussion points that take us further into the questions. What I had said, that the symbol that Chris Kyle, the notorious and celebrated American sniper, the celebrated marksman, the highly skilled killer elite, who had marked up more kills than any of his predecessors in military services, who was subsequently to die of a gunshot wound inflicted upon him at a shooting range by an associate. Seemingly under someone with a short fuse pulled a gun on Chris Kyle and shot him dead. So he himself meeting death, perhaps before his time. Chris Kyle is a very interesting case study. This American icon, this hero of the military services. There's more to him than the public story. My investigation reveals additional dimensions to Chris Kyle, and you can find my story, American Sniper Chris Kyle's Heroin Addiction and Media Mafia Demons. And this is very important to understand because our evidence so far pairs the image of the sniper with the use of drugs. It's in the testimony of the San Bernardino witness as an example. Let's listen to Chris Kyle. He's talking to Conan O'Brien.
Our optics and everything are so much more advanced than the guys had in even Vietnam.
Right.
Which you got Carlos Hathcock, who I think is the greatest sniper of all time. I have more kills, but that doesn't mean I'm better than he is. I was just put in a position where I had more opportunities. But yeah, and I definitely cheated. I used ballistic computer that tells me everything to do, so I'm just a monkey on a gun.
Monkey on a gun, it's a great little catchphrase that he used again and again. And I just say he's just off by one letter. It was a junkie on a gun, according to my research. For I hear him say the words, "The heroin chase, I connect up, see the wax."
The heroin chase, I connect up, see the wax. The heroin chase, I connect up, see the wax. The heroin chase, I connect up.
Heroin in wax folds is one of the trafficking means by which that drug is obtained. The chase, the heroin chase, the chasing the dragon, a well-known trope amongst the user community, the heroin user community. The tragedy of heroin addiction, the tragedy of post-traumatic stress and its impact on drug use and addiction amongst military service members, and particularly highly dangerous, highly addictive substances like heroin, which is attended with severe health and other social consequences. Again, Sally Abdel-Magid, the witness to San Bernardino, stated in her unconscious speech, she said, "The sniper, drug, skull, die."
The
drug skull sniper is embodied, from my very narrow and limited perspective, it's embodied in the statements of Chris Kyle, the acclaimed sniper who seemingly was on heroin, and it's seeking, wax-filled heroin, and his symbol, of which his family is proud, is the Punisher skull logo, the death head cited by the Estonian politician when he's talking about Ukraine. You see, it all comes together in my fertile imagination. It all comes together. This thread, this sniper thread, the primacy of the American sniper is found. The traces, the lingering traces of these covert operatives and their activities as political instruments, as history-changing instruments. It seems, that the legacy of the shooting death of President Kennedy, the shooting death of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., lead us into the 21st century and the primacy of the American sniper, the role of the American sniper in both domestic and foreign policy, the death of LaVoy Finicum, the sniper fire and cover-up at the scene of LaVoy Finicum, the missing evidence at the death scene of LaVoy Finicum, the primacy of the American sniper is really where my research has led me. And as you may have noticed, these stories that I wrote are over a multi-year period. This isn't something I just wrote this morning. These are stories that were published over several years of research. And this theme and this thread continued to come to my attention as if there was something that I needed to understand. There was something that was important for my understanding, that I needed to follow through, that I needed to grasp the significance of this, that I need to grasp the dimensions of domestic operations by government intelligence agencies. I stress that the Phoenix program cited by Secretary of State Kerry and found hidden in the remarks of Ammon Bundy identifies domestic CIA operations which are highly illegal and yet appear prevalent throughout modern history. And I can cite numerous examples and demonstrate to you that I have detected this and that this has been the subject of intensive censorship in my work as well. Let's take some examples. Let's go back to the 1970s where the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, so-called, appears on the scene, abducts heiress Patty Hearst, the heiress to the Hearst fortune, the Hearst newspaper fortune, the Hearst Hollywood empire fortune, the game-changing capo to capo of Hollywood and the newspaper industry of the late 19th century and early 20th century, William Randolph Hearst, one of the largest fortunes, and still the Hearst family, one of the wealthiest families in the United States, continuously cited in the Forbes list of richest Americans, the Hearst family. Patty Hearst, for those who recall, she was supposedly kidnapped from a home, half naked, and taken by her abductors, where she was brainwashed and subsequently participated in armed bank robberies, for which she was eventually captured and was sentenced and subsequently pardoned under a presidential decree. The SLA issue of the 1970s became a cultural meme that was played out and dramatized through Clint Eastwood movies, Dirty Harry movies, highlighted leftist protest type group, hippie type terrorists as the focal point of the crimes of the day. The SWAT teams of Los Angeles were apparently formed around the pursuit of the SLA. It formed in response to the seeming false flag SLA, which I say was entirely a domestic operation, and other researchers have pointed this out in great detail. There's much said about the CIA and Patty Hearst online, but I have, from her own voice, from the tapes that the kidnapped hostage release tapes that were played over the news, the communiques, I have in her very own words, definitive language that identifies her role as a CIA non-official cover domestic operative. This recording is from April 24th, 1974, Patty Hearst, while held hostage by the SLA.
As for my ex-fiancé, I'm amazed that he thinks that the first thing that I would want to do once freed would be to rush and see him. The fact is, I don't care if I ever see him again. During the last few months, Stephen has shown himself to be a sexist, ageist pig. Not that this was a sudden change from the way he always was. It merely became blatant during the period when I was still a hostage. Frankly, Stephen is the one who sounds brainwashed. I can't believe that those weary words he uttered were from his heart. They're a mixture of FBI rhetoric and Randy's simplicity.
There she is. You know, Patty Hearst is listed as an actress on the Internet Movie Database. Does this sound like an act? Does this sound like a persona? It's a very interesting question. But even more interesting is the unconscious remarks that I hear, for I hear her say, "Feel I'm naked, Langley."
You
see, in the spy universe, the naked spy is that party who lacks diplomatic immunity, who lacks an official cover. They are under non-official cover, or they are referred to as a NOC. The acronym NOC is used to describe that condition. Langley. Well, that's the headquarters. That's where the headquarters is of the CIA. It's a metonym. You see, the term Washington is the metonym for the seat of U.S. government. Langley, the seat of the CIA. It's a metonym. It's you know, we can play a word game and swap words out there to understand when she's talking about Langley and why she might be saying this. She might be invoking Langley while she's talking about her feelings of nakedness. I feel the absence of diplomatic immunity in my attempts to foment, you know, the early beginnings of the police state manifesting as the SWAT teams. And if people are concerned about the up-armoring of police in the present day, the legacy of Iraq War munitions and equipment that have been trickling down into police forces that we're seeing in evidence in Ferguson during the riots, where widely propagated images of a police sniper on top of a truck, we're seeing, you know, alarming images of a militarized police. People are concerned about that can look back to these early days and the apparent fomenting of violence, the apparent false flag operation of the so-called Symbionese Liberation Army, and the CIA NOC status of heiress Patty Hearst. It raises significant questions. It's not the only time we find evidence of these domestic CIA operations. For some of us may recall that former Vice President Al Gore was subject to accusations and claims of a Portland Oregon masseuse. Oregon, here is Oregon again, you see. A Portland, Oregon masseuse who claimed that he had engaged in ungentlemanly conduct. Let's listen to her testimony.
I felt very uncertain if I'd be able to get out of the room without being accosted by him anyway at this point. Does that all make sense to y'all? Mm-hmm. He then tried another tactic as though he had very suddenly switched personalities and began in a pleading tone, pleading for release of his second chakra there. There's so much tension being held.
Well, this witness may have more to tell us. I mean, her claims against Al Gore, you know, was this a sexual assault? Was this a smear campaign, a sting? What was really going on? I heard her say, "We're with Langley."
We're with Langley. We're with Langley. We're with Langley.
She invokes the same metonym as Patty Hearst, who said, "Feel I'm naked, Langley." And, you know, those in the listening audience tonight will say, "John, you know, all this metonym stuff, I mean, that's just so abstract. I mean, it's so obtuse. It's so indirect. Can't you get more explicit? Can't you just tell us, you know, show us somebody who's just saying it out loud without any kind of pretense?" Well, look no further than the former governor of California, who, during his election campaign, Arnold Schwarzenegger had this to say.
As some members said in there, I say to they said, "Arnold, I'm saying to myself, why I'm not moving out of this state with my business."
From which I deduced the words, "I'm with the CIA."
I'm with the CIA. I'm with the CIA. I'm with the CIA.
I think there is such a thing as CIA domestic operatives. I really believe this is the case. I believe that the forensic and military-grade precision that I demonstrated in my findings related to the Iraq War, in the identification of the BTK killer, in the identification of the accomplice of the Russian spy Anna Chapman, in the identification of the UFO files, all of my reports which preceded the mainstream press, which were verified and vindicated through the test of time, and are a matter of public record. These findings here of the domestic CIA operatives, the quality is the same. The quality of the intelligence is identical. The procedure is identical. Methodology, the practitioner, it's all the same. Same standard of quality, same standard of procedure. I think these findings are valid. And that particular clip of Arnold, in fact, was the basis of intensive censorship on late night U.S. radio, where I was blacklisted over 10 years ago from a major broadcasting platform that would not support my discussion of domestic politics in such a manner. This was, I said, tonight, if you think I've said some controversial things, if you think some of these opinions of mine or this evidence is controversial in nature, well, you are not alone. This has been grounds for censorship in the past, and I think it's a matter of concern that we live under such a dualistic situation. People are saying one thing and doing another. People are calling it justice, and it's all vigilante. People are calling for constitutional rights, and they're enabling stings. I find it highly problematic. I think we need to straighten these things out. I think we need to have open conversations about these questions. I think we need to identify where the incongruencies exist and bring our good intentions and our positive attributes to bear on these questions in order that we may begin to give formation to solutions and a strong society that can move forward and succeed. Not a society in disarray, not a society that is in chaos, not a society that's being undermined by for-profit agendas, by selfish individuals who are just trying to raise budgets by fomenting crimes. And the FBI is certainly notorious for inventing terrorism, domestic terrorism, and then claiming to solve the crime after having supplied the alleged criminals with all the materials they would possibly ever need. I mean, it's just highly questionable that federal police forces in the United States and Canada are behaving in such a manner, and that it is so brazen, it is so obvious. When will good people stand up to this and take dutiful steps to protect the integrity of our society, to make sure that we have a future, that our grandchildren have a future? There's no future in this chaos. There's no future in this type of undermining agenda. It's highly problematic. But again, this is only one narrow opinion, one thread of research, one line of evidence, one chain of evidence. There are many unanswered questions in the Malheur Standoff case, in the future of the Bundy militia. Many unanswered questions that we can only hope, watch, and be aware of what forces of justice may come to bear. I know that the United States Department of Justice is very interested in the cover-up of the FBI agents, and that may represent a turning point for consideration, that better people may step forward to say enough is enough and to draw the line and to take a stand against such actions in the interest of creating a better future and creating hope and to fulfill the dream of a nation that is ruled by law, a nation of laws, not a nation of chaos and anarchy. I'm Jon Kelly. I've been your host tonight. It's been wonderful to be with you. I thank you for listening. You can find me at yourinnervoice.com, where my clinical practice is 1-888-453-0751, and my journalistic work at newsinsideout.com, where all of the stories we covered tonight are residing. I continue to publish on threads and others. Newsinsideout.com. I thank you. I thank Dr. Ott for the chance to guest host. I hope to speak with you again. Thank you so much and have a great evening.